Let's talk about something that's on everyone's mind: commitment. Now, we know that when it comes to relationships, there's a lot of pressure to understand exactly what makes someone ready to take that step forward. But here's the thing: men, like all of us, need to feel a certain spark, a connection, something that makes them feel like they've found the person they're willing to invest in. Now, I'm not talking about just any connection here. I'm talking about that feeling that says, this person is someone I can see myself with long term. So if you're sitting there wondering what it is that finally gets a man to look at you and think, yeah, I can go the distance with this one, let's dive in. You ever wonder why some men seem so hesitant to commit, even when everything on the surface looks perfect? You give them time, attention, affection. They respond, they smile, they say the right things, but something still holds them back. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. No matter how tightly you try to contain it, it slips through. And the truth is, most people are looking in the wrong place for the answer. It isn't about what you do for him, it's about what he feels when he's with you. Not the moments where everything is easy, but the ones where he doesn't have to wear his armor. The ones where he forgets he even needed it. There's a space a man steps into when he starts to feel something he can't quite describe, a shift. Not loud, not obvious. It doesn't come with fireworks or grand statements. It comes quietly. It shows up in a moment when your silence soothes him more than your words, when your presence calms the part of him that usually runs. He finds himself reaching out for you, not because he should, but because something in you makes him feel a little more at home in his own skin. And that's rare for him, because truth be told, most of his life has taught him to be composed, collected, and in control, but something about the way you see him makes him feel free without ever needing to say it. He's not testing you. He's measuring the space. Is this somewhere he can breathe? Somewhere he can let down the part of himself that always needs to lead, to provide, to perform? You won't hear it in his words. You'll see it in the way he lingers a little longer after a goodbye, or the way he stays quiet when you expect him to speak. He's in that fragile space between curiosity and fear. He's wondering if what he's feeling with you is safe to trust. Because for him, commitment isn't a timeline, it's a surrender. And surrender never comes from logic, it comes from emotion he didn't see coming. There's a particular kind of connection that rewires how a man sees closeness. It isn't loud or needy. It's the kind that whispers to his nervous system that he doesn't have to keep running, that he doesn't have to always have the answer, that he can rest his guard and still be respected. It's an invisible invitation into a space where he doesn't feel exposed, but embraced. And the strangest part, he won't even realize it's happening at first. It'll creep in slowly, like a warmth that builds behind the scenes of his day. He'll catch himself thinking about you, not just because of what you said, but because of how he felt when you were near. You'll notice the shift before he does. He'll begin to reach for you, not to impress, not to perform, but just to be close, just to feel that calm he can't quite explain. He might not articulate it, but something inside him will start to associate you with peace, with ease, with the rare sense that he doesn't have to constantly beat on. And that's when the idea of commitment starts to grow roots. Not because he's been convinced or pressured, but because his body starts to feel safe in your presence. And safety, for a man who's been living with his guard up, feels better than any thrill. The men who run from commitment aren't running from you. They're running from what they believe commitment will cost them. Their freedom, their solitude, their identity. But when you offer a connection that doesn't threaten those things but honors them, something profound happens. He starts leaning in, not because you pulled him, but because something in him no longer wants to lean away. He starts sharing more than he usually would. He pauses before reacting. He listens in a way that tells you he's actually there. And all of that comes from one place: the feeling that he's allowed to be all of himself with you. This isn't about pretending to be someone else or performing emotional magic tricks. It's about holding a space where he can feel without being asked to explain it. A space where his silence isn't misunderstood, where his pauses don't have to be filled, where his vulnerability isn't used against him later. And you'll know it's working not when he says he's ready, but when he stops needing to protect himself from you. When you stop being someone he evaluates and start being someone he feels. And that feeling, it becomes the thing he never realized he was looking for. Because at the end of the day, what makes a man ready for commitment isn't a checklist of behaviors or a pressure-filled ultimatum. It's the emotional experience of being around someone who makes him feel more alive, more grounded, more himself. It's not about changing who you are to get him to stay. It's about being so grounded in your presence, so unapologetically whole, that he chooses to stay again and again, not out of obligation, but because in your presence, commitment no longer feels like giving something up. It feels like coming home. There's something few people talk about, but it's the difference between a man who stays temporarily and a man who roots himself deeply into something lasting. It's not what you wear. It's not what you say. It's not even how well you connect in your best moments. It's what he feels in the quiet seconds when the world isn't watching, when everything else has gone still, and it's just you and him. No expectations, no performances, no games. That's when he begins to ask himself a question he won't say out loud. Can I trust her with the part of me no one else sees? And how he answers that in his own mind shapes everything that comes next. Men are taught to be guarded even when they don't know they're doing it. They learn to show strength, project control, and carry calm even when they're unraveling inside. So when he starts spending time with someone who doesn't demand those masks to stay in place, it changes the atmosphere. He may not realize what's happening at first. He might just feel more relaxed around you. But underneath that ease is something quietly unfolding. He's testing the ground. He's wondering if you'll still hold the same gaze when his edges start to show. Not just the ones he polishes, but the ones he usually keeps hidden in shadow. Every man has a version of himself he's careful about revealing. It's not always about pain or deep secrets. Sometimes it's just the parts that feel too soft, too unsure, too unfinished. And the moment he starts to let that version of himself breathe around you, he's no longer just spending time with you. He's starting to feel connected. But here's the part most people miss. That version doesn't come out under pressure. It doesn't emerge in environments where he feels like he has to earn affection or protect his pride. It only rises when there's room for stillness, when there's space for silence that doesn't feel awkward, and when your energy tells him that he doesn't have to be anything other than present. It doesn't happen in a big reveal. It starts in the pauses. When you ask a question and he takes longer to answer. When he glances away before speaking. When his body leans in before his words catch up. That's where trust begins to take root. And if you respond with curiosity instead of control, with softness instead of suspicion, you teach him something profound without ever needing to explain it. That your closeness isn't a trap, it's a choice. And because it's a choice, it becomes the kind of bond that doesn't need to be chased. It pulls him in effortlessly, even when he tries to resist. He begins to notice something he hasn't felt in a long time, or maybe never at all. That your connection doesn't demand that he shrink or edit himself. That your attention doesn't rise and fall with his success or mistakes. And slowly, the grip he has on his own emotions loosens. He doesn't feel like he has to protect his thoughts or rehearse his feelings before sharing them. This is where trust becomes more than a word. It becomes a feeling. One that lives in his body, not his logic. One that makes him forget the rules he was taught about who he needs to be in order to be worthy of staying. There's a kind of closeness that doesn't happen through effort. It happens through consistency, through being the same when he's quiet as you are when he's expressive, through holding his silence with the same warmth you give his laughter. And that kind of presence does something to a man that nothing else can. It lowers the walls he didn't even know were still standing. Not because you tore them down, but because you gave him a reason to stop hiding behind them. And when a man puts down his shield in front of you, even for a moment, what he's really doing is saying, this space feels safe enough for the truth to breathe. The most powerful bond isn't built on constant words or dramatic confessions. It's built in the invisible space between moments, in the way you respond when his guard flickers, in the way you hold the energy when he's wrestling with something internal. That space teaches him what kind of woman you are. Not just when things are light and easy, but when he's unsure and in need of reassurance he doesn't know how to ask for. He learns through those moments, whether you're someone he can turn to or someone he has to protect himself from. And that answer, his answer, is what determines if he stays fully or holds back without telling you why. A man doesn't need perfect words or endless validation. He needs a space where he feels allowed to be undone without being unloved, where his pause doesn't cost him connection, and where his slow unfolding doesn't make you restless. When he finds that, he stops looking for what's next. He stops wondering if commitment is a risk, because in that rare kind of energy, commitment stops being something he has to decide. It becomes something he feels safe enough to choose. And once he chooses it, he's all in. Not because he needs to be, but because he wants to be, where he finally feels like he can exhale. There's the moment in every connection where the surface starts to crack, not in a broken way, but in a revealing one. That moment where two people stop trying to impress and start to influence, not with charm, not with games, but with energy that pushes each other into something richer. Most people chase comfort, but the truth is, lasting closeness is built where challenge and support meet. He's not just looking for someone who agrees with him. He's searching for someone who makes him think deeper, feel sharper, and act with more clarity. And when he meets that kind of energy, he feels it in his bones, not just in conversation. He begins to sense that being with you doesn't allow him to stay stuck, not because you demand it, but because your presence doesn't let him hide. There's something in the way you speak, the way you ask questions, the way you look at him when he tries to brush off something important. It shifts him, not aggressively, not harshly, but in a way that makes him want to level up. Not just for you, but because he starts to see the version of himself you reflect back at him. A version that feels more aligned, more awake, more powerful than the one he's used to settling for. Growth inside a relationship isn't about lectures or lessons. It's about subtle awakenings. It's those moments when he starts catching himself wanting to be better without being told to change. When he notices his habits, his patterns, his routines, not because you criticize them, but because your example made him realize what's possible. That's the kind of transformation that sticks. And here's the secret. He doesn't feel controlled. He feels inspired. And when a man feels inspired by the one he shares his space with, everything starts to expand. His ambition, his self-worth, his ability to trust. You'll notice the shift in his eyes before his actions. He'll listen a little more closely. He'll ask about things he used to ignore. He won't just respond, he'll reflect. That's because something about the way you show up, grounded, present, unshaken, calls out the same in him. But this isn't about fixing him. This is about inviting him into a relationship that doesn't just feel good, but does good. One that stretches both of you, not in stress, but in evolution. And that growth, when it's mutual, creates a fire that doesn't burn out. It burns brighter. There's the difference between a relationship that entertains and one that elevates. One fills the time, the other shapes the future. He starts to recognize that when he's with you, he doesn't feel stagnant. He doesn't feel like he's circling the same conversations, same routines, same emotional responses. There's movement, there's curiosity. There's this quiet feeling that life with you isn't just about loving, it's about becoming. And in a world full of distractions, a man will hold tight to anything that helps him remember who he's capable of being. You don't need to push him. You don't need to lead him. You just need to keep standing in your own growth, because the most magnetic thing isn't perfection, it's evolution. It's watching someone choose their own expansion without waiting for permission. And when he sees you doing that, he starts asking different questions of himself. He stops resisting the things he used to avoid. He begins to want to meet you where you are, not to catch up, but to rise with you. That's the kind of energy that builds a bond that doesn't just survive, it transforms both people involved. A powerful connection makes space for becoming. When you offer that without pressure, without force, what you're really giving him is permission to step into more of himself. And that kind of space is rare. Most people want the end result without the growing pains. But you allow the mess without losing the vision. You see his potential without ignoring his reality. That balance is what makes him stay, not out of fear of loss, but out of desire for more. He's not afraid of getting close. He's afraid of losing himself in the process. But when he realizes that being close to you doesn't mean shrinking, it means expanding, something clicks. He starts leaning in with more intention. He starts showing up with more presence. And that's when the relationship becomes a mirror, not just of who you are, but of who he's capable of being. In that reflection, he finds something he didn't know he was missing. Not just connection, but evolution. And in that evolution, he stops asking if he's ready, because suddenly he wants to be. There's a silence that tells you more than words ever could. It's not awkward. It doesn't demand to be filled. It's the kind that makes a man wonder why he feels so grounded around you, why his body relaxes when everything else in his life feels like it's pulling him apart. And the truth is, it has nothing to do with what you say and everything to do with what he senses. He doesn't consciously think, this is what I've been looking for. It's subtler than that. It's in the way his breathing slows when you're near. It's in how your energy meets his without trying to control it, shift it, or decode it. He doesn't always know what to call that feeling. Most of the time, he's not even aware he's experiencing it. But something in him starts returning to it again and again, like muscle memory, like a home he didn't know he missed. He begins to feel the difference between peace and distraction, between presence and performance. And the wild part is, he's not looking for a fix. He's looking for a rhythm, something his life hasn't quite offered him, something that doesn't overwhelm or disappear. It just stays quiet, steady, and eventually necessary. When a man finds that kind of energy, everything else begins to shift. He's no longer pulled toward the chaos he once mistook for chemistry. He's no longer fascinated by the chase that left him empty. Instead, he finds himself lingering longer in your presence. Not because you asked him to, but because he wants to be where he doesn't have to pretend. Where his strength isn't a performance and his stillness isn't misunderstood. And the more he leans into that, the more he realizes this isn't just connection, it's alignment. And alignment is what makes him stop wandering. You become less of an experience and more of an atmosphere. You stop being a moment in his day and become the space where his day feels more real. He feels that when your conversations don't need to be constant to be felt, when your silence doesn't create distance but draws him in deeper. That energy, undemanding, unshaken, unwavering, does something to a man who's spent most of his life proving himself. It tells him he doesn't have to. And that kind of acceptance doesn't weaken him, it anchors him. It gives him something solid to stand on in a world that always asks him to perform. You won't hear him say it outright. You won't get a speech. What you'll get is consistency. Subtle shifts in how he shows up. A look that lasts longer. A touch that says more than words. He begins to move differently, not just in how he treats you, but in how he treats his own peace. Because he's learning from you without you trying to teach. He's absorbing your steadiness. He's mirroring your calm. And most importantly, he's realizing that closeness with you doesn't mean losing himself. It means finding parts of him that only show up in the quiet. People often think love is loud, filled with declarations and fireworks. But the love that lasts is quiet. It's made of the kind of presence that doesn't ask for attention. It commands it by simply existing. He feels that when you're not trying to fix his silence, when you don't confuse his distance for disinterest, you know how to hold space, not fill it. And that makes him trust you. Because in a world that rushes, pressures, and pulls, your ability to pause is what draws him closer than anything else ever could. He starts to remember himself differently around you. Not as the man who has to be everything, but as someone who's already enough. And that realization doesn't make him complacent, it makes him more intentional. He starts showing up with more weight, more clarity, more direction, because he knows that what he's building with you isn't built on noise, it's built on a depth he doesn't find anywhere else. And that depth doesn't scare him. It grounds him. It gives him something real to hold on to when everything else feels unstable. There's a reason he keeps coming back. It's not drama. It's not adrenaline. It's the rare peace you bring that he can't seem to find anywhere else. It's how your presence doesn't demand anything, but invites everything. That invitation, that feeling becomes something sacred. And when a man feels that kind of safety, not in words, but in the energy you hold, commitment stops being a question. It becomes the answer he didn't know he was already living into, quietly, fully, willing. There's a specific kind of spark that doesn't flash in public, but ignites in private. It's not loud, it's not performative, but it moves deep under the surface and shifts everything he thought he knew about closeness. It's in the way you hold space for his edges without flinching. It's in the way you respond when he's not polished, when he's raw, when he's unsure. Most men don't fear closeness, they fear being misunderstood in it. They fear giving too much too soon and being judged instead of received. So when he meets someone who listens not just with her ears, but with her presence, it doesn't feel like comfort, it feels like revelation. You don't have to be perfect, you don't have to have all the right words. What reaches him is the way you make him feel seen without dissecting him. He starts to notice how your attention doesn't flicker based on his strength or struggle. You aren't reacting to what he gives, you're responding to who he is. And that shifts the dynamic. Suddenly he's not trying to impress you, he's trying to bring you closer to the truth he usually protects. Because there's something about your stillness that makes him believe maybe, just maybe, he won't be met with judgment when he finally drops his guard. He may not say it, but he starts doing things differently. He takes a little longer to leave. He lingers in the conversation even when the words run out. He starts offering pieces of his past, not as confessions, but as invitations. And that's where the real connection begins, not in perfection, but in permission. Permission to let the masks slip. Permission to bring questions instead of answers. Permission to let the silence breathe between you without it becoming a reason to retreat. And that kind of space, it becomes more than rare, it becomes unforgettable. Truth is, men don't fall because of words, they fall because of energy. The way you move when you're not trying to be noticed. The way you stay steady when the vibe gets vulnerable. He watches that, even when you think he's not paying attention. He feels the shift in his own energy when he's near you. It's subtle, but it stirs something he hasn't felt in a long time. A sense that he doesn't need to run, doesn't need to hide, doesn't need to perform. And when that hits, he's no longer searching for excitement, he's searching for real. There's something powerful about the way you keep showing up as yourself. Not with drama, not with pressure, but with depth. You're not asking for more than he can give, but you're also not shrinking to make him feel bigger. And that balance, that unspoken understanding that you are whole with or without his approval, it shifts something in him. It makes him want to meet you where you are. not because he feels obligated, but because he sees how easy it is to lose someone who's not chasing, only choosing. What makes a man open isn't constant conversation, it's consistent energy. The kind that stays steady whether he's playful or quiet, certain or questioning. You become the space where he doesn't feel the need to explain every emotion. And in a world where most people expect clarity before connection, your ability to connect before clarity becomes magnetic. He feels that pull, not just physically, but emotionally. And without realizing it, he starts pulling you closer. Not through grand gestures, but through small, sacred shifts that say, this matters. What draws him in deeper is the way you protect the connection. Not by controlling it, but by respecting it. You don't demand moments, you offer it. And because of that, he starts to bring more of himself to the space between you, not to fill the silence, but to explore it. That exploration turns into understanding, and that understanding turns into trust. And once trust builds, commitment becomes less about decision and more about desire. Not something he's pressured into, but something he's pulled toward. He stays because he feels safe in the storm and seen in the stillness. He stays because you don't make him earn closeness, you invite him to relax into it. And that shift from pressure to presence is what unlocks the part of him that's been waiting for someone to see the man behind the mask. And once that man feels recognized, not just admired, but known, there's no question left to ask. Only the quiet certainty that he doesn't want to go anywhere else. There's a moment he doesn't talk about, not even to himself, the moment when admiration starts to turn into belief. It doesn't happen in a dramatic flash. It begins slowly, quietly, even as he watches how you hold yourself when no one is watching, how your values don't shift depending on who's in the room. That unwavering alignment between your words and your behavior, it doesn't just impress him, it makes him question the standards he's been living by. And without even realizing it, he starts holding himself to something higher just by standing next to you. He notices how you stay rooted even when emotions rise. You don't flinch in chaos, you don't crumble under conflict. There's something in the way you manage your own world that makes him feel steadier in his. You show him a different kind of strength, the kind that doesn't dominate but influences without force. And that kind of influence isn't loud, it lingers. It finds its way into his habits, his thoughts, the way he approaches things he used to avoid. You don't have to correct him. Your presence alone makes him want to elevate. He starts to lean into you, not for escape, but for grounding. And when life shakes him, and it always does, he finds himself thinking of how you'd respond before reacting himself. That reflection is quiet but transformative. You become more than his partner. You become his mirror, his anchor, his calm before he even realizes he needs one. And here's what's rare. You never ask him to be anything other than real. But you still bring out the part of him that wants to grow, not because he's not enough, but because with you, growth feels like freedom. The safety he feels with you doesn't come from control or promises. It comes from the way you don't make love feel like a transaction. You don't measure his value in gestures or timelines. You meet him where he is and leave room for where he's going. That kind of acceptance is dangerous in the best way. It dismantles his defenses. It creates a space where he can breathe differently, where his past doesn't echo louder than his present. And in that space, he begins to settle not into comfort, but into clarity. He begins to share things he didn't even know he was hiding, not in grand confessions, but in moments that unfold like pages turning, a memory here, a hope there. He tests the waters and finds them warm, not because you fix what's broken, but because you don't turn away from what's vulnerable. You hold it gently, respectfully. And that softness has more power than any advice or instruction ever could. It tells him that he doesn't have to be perfect to be kept, that he doesn't need to armor up to be respected. He watches you more than you know. Not just your beauty, but your grace under pressure, the way you carry conversations that could have collapsed, the way you don't rush feelings that need time to breathe. And you show him that love isn't a performance, it's a practice, a daily choice. And that's what changes his perspective. Commitment no longer feels like a cage, it feels like alignment, not something he's forced into, but something that reflects the kind of life he actually wants to live, quietly, intentionally, fully. When a man sees that you don't just speak love, you live it, he stops wondering if you're different. He knows. And he knows it not because you told him, but because he's experienced it. Every time you choose to be patient when it would be easier to walk away. Every time you lean into a conversation instead of shutting it down. Every time you show him that consistency isn't boring, it's safe. And that safety, it doesn't dull the connection, it sharpens it. It makes the bond less about passion and more about presence. He's not afraid of giving you everything. He's afraid of giving everything to the wrong person. But over time, you prove, without ever asking, that you know how to receive him without losing yourself. And that's the shift. That's the moment everything changes. When he realizes that with you, he doesn't just have love, he has direction, and that kind of clarity doesn't fade. It deepens, it grows, and eventually it leads him right where he was always meant to be, not just ready to commit, but ready to stay.